Begun getting to know, and those of you I've known for a time. It's really a privilege and a pleasure to be here. My family and I have been so well cared for since we arrived. We've been here now just over a week, and at least my family has. I went back last week to Charleston and finished things up there. And it's good to be in the house of God. It's good to be in Spartanburg, where I grew up. Y'all know that I grew up in the other side of the county, Boiling Springs, and District 6 was not real popular where I grew up. But what's that?
Still isn't.
Well, and back then at least we had a chance of beating you every once in a while in football. That's changed too. But it's good to be here, and we're going to read from Mark's Gospel in our worship together today, and it's a great story. It's a wonderful story, and it's a story that I was thinking over the structure of this story as this day approached, and as I was thinking over the structure of this story, Elise came and laid beside me a sandwich she had prepared. Isn't that nice? She's such a and it occurred to me that this is a sandwich story. It starts out about this good Bible-believing, church-going, God-fearing man named Jairus who has a problem and goes to Jesus about it. And in the middle of his story, we're interrupted by this woman who has another issue that she brings to Jesus. And so the story is a story sandwich, really. Starting with Jairus, coming to the point where this woman enters the story, interrupts the story, and then finishing with the proverbial bun on top. Jairus' conclusion of his story. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side of the lake, a great crowd gathered round him, and he was there by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter's at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her that she may live, that she may be made well and live." So he went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. And a large crowd was there, and in it was a woman suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She'd endured much under many physicians. And she'd spent all that she had. And she was no better, but she was getting worse. And she'd heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be made well." And immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see a crowd pressing in on you? How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who'd done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter's dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child's not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. And then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. And he took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, get up. And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. And at this they were overcome with amazement. And he strictly ordered them that no one should know this. And then he told them to give her something to eat. This is the word of God for us, the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
So, did y'all know a week earlier, prior to this story, the Capernaum Lions Club had named Jairus their Lion of the Year. And they had approached him, the chair the Lions Club had, and said they wanted to give him an award. And he said, an award? For me? You must be lying. Okay. That's really how it happened. They honored Jairus because Jairus deserved it. This is a guy who was not only outstanding at everything he did, but he was upstanding. He did the right things. At least most of the time, while people were watching. And he was always going the extra mile for his neighbors. You know somebody like Jairus. You know somebody who is the consummate nice guy. The kind of guy you pull for, and the kind of guy who always, no matter what, is going to pull for you. That's the kind of guy Jairus was. And when he went to Jesus, he had nobody else in mind but his daughter. His daughter was ill. And to this point in Jairus' life, it had seemed that everybody, most of the time, had their stuff together, including him. And it seemed like that to everybody about Jairus, that this guy has it together. He kept his chariot immaculate. Don't you hate those people you get in their car and there's nothing in the floorboards? and it just proves that his daughter was 12, and there was nobody younger. Because any children younger than that, and there's stuff in your floorboard. He had a Pepsodent smile, and everybody thought that he had a life to match. He had everything in the world going for him. He was in church every Sunday, or synagogue every Saturday. Until that day when his pressed white robes are down in the dirt, begging Jesus to do something. Now the other person in this story, the other main character, is a woman that Mark declines to name. He doesn't tell us her name. She is at the other end of things from Jairus. She has lived her life out of the public eye. Nobody knows who she is, and they like it that way. When she finally does get noticed, it is because of something she catches, not something she does. And once she gets sick, the people who notice her are the ones who are trying to avoid her. In the grocery store, at the post office. And a few of the people who notice try to help, doctors. But the bills pile up and the bank account dries up, and pretty soon her finances and her physical body are bled dry. And she began to pray that it would just all be over. She never said it aloud to anybody but God, but she thought, what really would change if I just disappeared? Maybe she'd just leave town and not come back. Maybe she'd just quit scrapping and scrimping and just let herself starve. Who would miss me, she said. Who would miss me? That was a question on her mind the day that she went to the well. It was a well reserved for people like her. A well outside of town. And then from the well she went to the trash heap where once a week a kid from the synagogue would bring the scraps of the community out for people like her. And she was just stashing some breadcrumbs into the fold of her gown when a complete stranger, someone who hadn't been in town long enough to know who she was and why they shouldn't be talking to her, he comes up to her and says, "Have you heard the news, Mrs.? Have you heard the news? A prophet's coming. A mighty preacher and healer named Jesus of Nazareth. The boat's due at the Miller's Landing any moment now. And let me tell you, Mrs., I can testify myself that this man's power is from God." And the first time she heard him call her Mrs., she thought something about it sounded familiar. And the second time he said it, it was as if a camel kicked her, and she realized who this guy was. This is the crazy guy from Gerasa. The story just before this in Mark, he tells that story about the Gerasene demoniac. This is the guy. She had seen him years ago. She'd scraped up enough money to pay a fisherman for passage across the lake, and then the passage beyond that to Gerasa, and she had gone seeking a cure. She had heard there was a physician there who might be able to help. When she got to the address she'd been given, there was nobody there. And by that time, she had just enough to get back home to Capernaum. And so she headed back, defeated again. And as her rented donkey took her back to the boat dock to cross to the other side, a crazy man possessed by demons, and who knows what else, had approached her and said, "Hello there, Mrs. You look disappointed. Don't be so sad. If God won't help you, I know plenty of ones who will." And he smiled the most hideous smile and laughed the most sinister laugh that she had ever heard. And she spurred her donkey on, and she'd gotten on that boat, and she had not looked back. And when she described what happened to the boatman, he grunted and told her she was lucky the man hadn't tried to hurt her, because everyone knew he was not only crazy, but he was dangerous. And that was the guy she saw that day, walking into her neighborhood, telling her about the man who had healed him. And she, for the first time in years, was curious. She felt a flicker of hope, and it was like that sensation you get back in a limb when it's fallen asleep. It's like a mixture of pleasure and pain, and it hurts even as it's helping. And that's what she felt in her soul, that sense of something that has been long asleep coming awake. And as quickly as he told her about Jesus of Nazareth, dude was gone. And she had a decision to make. Do I risk it again? Or do I just head back home? Just wait to die? Do I take a chance on the stranger's story, or do I stick with the sad story I know? And she decided in that moment that it came down to faith. And she couldn't identify precisely why, but for some reason she believed the man's story. She believed the man's testimony. And for that same reason, she had this odd notion that if she could just manage to brush up against Jesus of Nazareth, her life would be changed. And you know the rest of the story. This unknown outcast woman who has screwed up